It began, as so many tragedies do, in the silence of a bedroom where the morning sun refused to feel warm. When his wife entered the room that day, she found her husband lying perfectly still on their bed. His eyes were open, yet unfocused, pupils fixed on the ceiling, as though staring through the plaster into something no one else could see. His lips moved faintly, shaping words so quietly she had to lean down to catch them. "I've died," he whispered. "There's no blood in me anymore. My heart stopped in the night." At first, she thought it was a morbid joke, a strange attempt to scare her. But as she touched his arm, she felt the clammy coolness of his skin, the way he didn't resist when she shook him, the absence of hunger in his eyes. The children begged him to get up, but he only repeated the same chilling refrain. "I am no longer among the living. Please, stop pretending." Hours passed. He would not eat. He would not drink. He would not rise. His wife, now frantic, dialed for help. When the paramedics arrived, they found a man with normal vital signs, but utterly convinced that he was already a corpse. The medical notes from that first ambulance ride are short, clinical, but when read aloud they sound almost like lines in a horror script. Patient unresponsive to questioning about orientation. Repeatedly states, "I am dead. I have rotted inside. Skin pale but perfused. Vitals within normal limits." Refuses water offered by wife, stating, "A corpse does not drink." The neighbors whispered as the stretcher rolled past the front gate. Some said the family must have angered God. Others muttered about curses, that a spirit had stolen his soul. But when he arrived at the hospital, the truth became even stranger. The emergency department was brightly lit, sterile, and loud. But to him, it might as well have been a morgue. He told every nurse, every physician who leaned in close, "You are wasting resources. This body is finished. Send me to the mortuary." He refused blood draws, insisting there was no blood to collect. He refused cardiac monitoring, claiming his heart had long since stopped. The triage nurse later recalled, "Patient whispered that his intestines were gone, eaten away by worms. He insisted we were handling a cadaver, not a man." The attending physician, faced with this bizarre presentation, scribbled his first impression into the chart. Possible psychotic break. Rule out schizophrenia, severe depression with psychotic features, neurological insult, substance-induced state. But behind those words, there lingered something more disturbing. Because even in the heart of modern medicine, where science guides every decision, the sight of a man insisting he is dead carries an almost supernatural weight. From here, the story unfolds like a puzzle. A rare psychiatric mystery wrapped in the eerie tones of folklore. Was this simply madness? Or was there something else? Something neurological, perhaps even something unexplained, that convinced him his body was nothing but a rotting shell? In the following hours, doctors would try to unravel the truth. They would perform tests, interviews, and scans. And yet, each new piece of evidence seemed only to deepen the strangeness of his condition. For his family, the fear was not theoretical. It was visceral. The man they loved would not eat, would not speak of the future, would not even acknowledge the life he had lived. He told his wife that their marriage ended with his death. He told his son to stop calling him dad, because corpses cannot be fathers. The house he left behind that morning, sheets still imprinted with the outline of his unmoving body, became the subject of whispered stories in the neighborhood. Some said he had seen a ghost. Others swore he had been cursed by a jealous relative. But inside the hospital walls, the whispers took a different shape. Words like psychosis, schizophrenia, severe depression, and neurological lesion. And somewhere, hidden deep inside the folds of medical literature, was the true name of his condition. One almost forgotten, one so rare that most doctors never see it in their entire careers. Cotard syndrome. At first, the medical staff approached the case as they would any psychiatric emergency. The admitting psychiatrist, a man with 20 years of experience, sat across from the patient in a quiet consultation room. The blinds were drawn, the fluorescent lights casting a cold pallor across the table. The patient sat upright, unmoving, his hands folded neatly in his lap. When asked his name, he answered in a monotone, "It doesn't matter. That man has died." The psychiatrist probed further. Did he know where he was? "Yes," he said, "in a hospital. But you've made a mistake. This is where the living go. I should be where the dead are kept." The psychiatrist scribbled in his notebook, "Patient demonstrates nihilistic delusion. Possible Cotard's delusion versus schizophrenia with bizarre content. Affect flat, insight absent, speech coherent but thematically fixated on death." But when asked why he believed he was dead, his explanation was chilling. "I can smell it. My organs have liquefied. The blood has drained from my veins. My heart has not beaten since yesterday. The psychiatrist placed a stethoscope against his chest, letting him hear the unmistakable lube-dub of his own living heart. But the man only shook his head. "That sound," he whispered, "is the echo of a machine still running after the power has gone. Just noise, not life." The family was called in for collateral history. They sat in a small interview room, speaking in hushed tones. His wife looked pale, exhausted, her voice trembling as she recounted the days leading up to the episode. He had grown quieter, more withdrawn, stopped laughing, stopped coming to dinner. "I thought it was just stress. The night before it happened, he told me he could feel worms crawling in his stomach. I thought he meant it figuratively. I didn't know he truly believed it." The psychiatrist considered depression. Severe psychotic depression can cause delusions, sometimes even delusions of death. But there were inconsistencies. The patient did not describe sadness, hopelessness, or guilt, only the certainty that he was already gone. Other doctors offered different theories. A neurologist suggested temporal lobe epilepsy, known for causing unusual religious or death-themed experiences. Another raised the possibility of a brain tumor pressing against regions responsible for self-perception. An EEG was ordered. An MRI followed. The scans came back normal. Meanwhile, the patient grew increasingly hostile to treatment. Nurses offered food. He refused, saying corpses require no nourishment. They offered water. He turned his face away. The chart filled with haunting notes. Patient refuses nutrition. States feeding a corpse is pointless. Skin cool yet no fever. Appears dehydrated but insists fluids unnecessary. Family distraught. Wife begging staff to convince him to eat. At night, the ward grew quieter, and the nurses rotated rounds. One of them, a young nurse only a year into her career, later admitted she avoided his room when she could. "He would just lie there," she recalled in a staff interview, "wide awake, staring at the ceiling, sometimes whispering. When I leaned closer, I could hear him say things like, 'The worms are coming. I can feel them in my throat.' It didn't sound like a man having delusions. It sounded like a man describing his own autopsy." Another nurse said she once entered to check his foreline and found him sitting upright in bed, lips moving in silent prayer. When she asked what he was doing, he answered, "I'm asking for permission to cross over, but they won't let me." She swore she left the room trembling, being carried out of his home, gathered in small groups. Some said he had been cursed. Others whispered he was possessed. His wife admitted she had even considered calling a priest. Not because she believed it, but because she was desperate. In one haunting account, she described sitting at his bedside and begging him to come back to them, to fight. He turned his hollow eyes toward her and said, "You must stop mourning me. The man you loved is gone. You are only clinging to a body." The psychiatrists pushed forward with antipsychotic medication. The first days showed no improvement. He swallowed the pills mechanically, like a ritual, then told the nurse afterward, "Even corpses can be embalmed. Chemicals change nothing." The false leads deepened. Some argued it was schizophrenia, though his age, late 40s, was unusual for a first break. Others leaned toward severe depression, though he denied feeling sadness. The neurologists, unsatisfied with negative scans, ordered more labs, thyroid levels, vitamin deficiencies, autoimmune panels. All returned normal. It was as if the man were trapped between two worlds, physically alive, yet psychically convinced of death. The hospital records from this period read like fragments of a ghost story disguised as medical notes. Patient states he has no stomach, refuses meal, believes he has already been buried. Family distressed, wife crying at bedside. Patient cooperative but perseverative on delusion of death. One attending physician confessed in a later interview, "You don't expect to be shaken by psychiatric patients after years in practice. But something about him, it unnerved us. It wasn't the content of his delusion. It was the calm conviction. He wasn't ranting, he wasn't hysterical. He was serene, like a man who had already crossed over." But the human body cannot live on conviction alone. By the end of the first week, his weight began to drop. His lips cracked from dehydration. Nurses warned that without feeding intervention, his organs, the ones he swore had already rotted, would soon begin to fail for real. Still, he insisted, "Let me go. Stop pretending this body is alive." The family pleaded for answers. The doctors argued in hushed tones in the staff lounge. Each test ruled out more possibilities, and yet no progress was made. It was then that one young resident, flipping through dusty case reports, stumbled on a forgotten phrase. Cotard syndrome, a condition so rare it often reads like folklore rather than medicine. A psychiatric state where the patient holds a fixed, unshakable belief that they are dead, do not exist, or have lost their internal organs. It was a possibility, but a frightening one, because cases like these are notoriously resistant to treatment. And if the doctors could not break the delusion, then starvation itself might finish what his mind had already declared. By the third week of admission, the hospital had become less a place of healing and more a stage for his delusion. Every morning, the nurses recorded the same observations. Patient refuses breakfast, states corpses do not eat. Patient lying motionless, whispers intermittently, "I am decaying." Weight loss noted. Wife distraught, crying at bedside. His body was weakening, yet his voice, calm, detached, certain, never wavered. When a psychiatrist asked if he understood the consequences of refusing food, he simply answered, "There are no consequences for the dead." The medical team decided to attempt tube feeding. In the procedure room, as nurses prepared the nasogastric line, he looked at them with something that might have been pity. "You're embalming me," he said softly, "not nourishing me." The tube was placed. Liquid nutrition was delivered. But afterward, he tugged at the line, saying, "Take it out. Corpses don't keep tubes." Restraints were briefly considered, but his wife begged against it. "He was always so proud," she whispered. "He'd see it as desecration." The psychiatrists revised the treatment plan. Antipsychotics were continued. Antidepressants were added. Electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, was proposed as a last resort, given historical reports of success in similar cases. But the idea unsettled the family. "He already believes he's dead," his wife argued. "How will shocks convince him otherwise?" The doctors explained that ECT, though controversial, sometimes resets the circuits of the brain in ways medication cannot. But they could promise nothing. Meanwhile, staff morale suffered. The nurses spoke of his room as if it were haunted. One recalled entering to find him whispering to the ceiling, "Bury me deeper. The light still reaches my eyes." Another swore she saw him standing by the window one night, pale against the glass, murmuring, "The worms are outside. I can hear them scratching." The atmosphere grew heavy. Even veteran staff admitted unease. "It's one thing when a patient screams or rages," said one nurse. "You know it's illness. But when someone calmly insists they're a corpse, it seeps into you. You start checking your own pulse." The family, too, fractured under the strain. His teenage son visited once, then refused to return. "It's not him anymore," he told his mother. "It's something wearing his face." His wife stayed, clinging to the man she loved, even as he pushed her away. "You're free now," he told her one evening. Widows are not bound to corpses. The doctors broadened their search. Could it be a rare neurological syndrome masquerading as psychosis? Blood tests were repeated. Imaging reviewed again. One resident suggested autoimmune encephalitis, a condition where the immune system attacks the brain, causing bizarre psychiatric symptoms. But spinal fluid analysis came back clean. No antibodies. No inflammation. The neurologists shook their heads. The brain looks normal. The problem is not structural. It's interpretive. A case conference was held. Around the table sat psychiatrists, neurologists, residents, nurses. On the screen at the front of the room, the patient's MRI glowed, a map of a brain with no visible flaw. "This," said the lead psychiatrist, pointing to the scans, "is what makes Cotard so terrifying. The hardware appears intact. But the software, the very program that tells us we are alive, malfunctions. He experiences death as reality, not metaphor. A resident asked, "But why? Why now?" He has no psychiatric history, no trauma. The psychiatrist replied, "Sometimes the mind collapses under unseen pressures. Sometimes it is depression taken to its most grotesque extreme. Sometimes, we never know." In the meantime, the patient deteriorated. His weight dropped dangerously. His skin, already pale, now sagged over his cheekbones. He grew faint when standing, yet still insisted he was already gone. The chart became more desperate. Refuses fluids. States, "There is no blood to replenish." Tells wife to plan burial. Expresses no fear of death. Insists death has already occurred. Supernatural interpretations persisted outside the hospital walls. His sister arrived from a nearby village, clutching a small Bible, convinced he was possessed. "This is not illness," she declared in the family meeting. "It is punishment. He needs an exorcism, not drugs." The doctors dismissed it, but the words lingered. His wife confessed later that, in the dead of night, she too wondered if some unseen force had hollowed him out. "It wasn't the things he said," she admitted. "It was the way he said them, like he was reporting from the other side." Back on the ward, his decline reached crisis. One evening, a nurse found him collapsed on the floor beside the bed, lips blue from dehydration. He was rushed to intensive care, for fluids forced into his veins. For a moment, his body revived. His pulse strengthened. When he awoke, he looked around the ICU and sighed. "You're prolonging the charade. Stop pretending this corpse belongs in your machines." The attending psychiatrist knew they were out of time. Antipsychotics had failed. Antidepressants had failed. Nutrition was nearly impossible. ECT was scheduled. In the early morning, he was wheeled into the treatment suite. Electrodes were placed on his temples. His wife signed the consent, hands trembling. The first session passed uneventfully. A seizure induced, monitored, controlled. When he awoke, he whispered the same refrain. "Still dead." But ECT is not a one-time cure. It is a course repeated, sometimes many times. And so it began. After the second session, he was quieter. After the third, he asked for water. Nurses exchanged hopeful looks. After the fourth, he accepted a meal, just a few bites. His wife wept when she saw him swallow. Was it working? But improvement in Cotards is rarely linear. That night, he called his wife close and whispered in her ear, "The food is only for show. Don't be fooled. I am feeding worms, not flesh." The course of electroconvulsive therapy continued. Each session followed the same ritual. Early morning transport, electrodes applied, brief controlled seizure, careful monitoring. And afterward, the wait. The staff searched his eyes for change, for a flicker of recognition, for signs that his conviction of death might weaken. At first, the results were subtle. He accepted water, sometimes a few spoonfuls of broth. He no longer fought the nurses when they checked vitals. For the first time in weeks, he spoke in complete sentences. "I had a dream," he told one resident. "In the dream, I was alive." The words were recorded with underlined emphasis in the chart. Reports dream of being alive. The family's hope began to rise. His wife held his hand longer. She smiled when he sipped juice. "He's coming back to us," she whispered to the staff. But recovery in Cotard syndrome is never straightforward. One night, a nurse making rounds heard low murmurs from his room. She stepped inside quietly, only to find him speaking into the dark. "Don't let them fool you," he whispered to the ceiling. "This is embalming, not living." When she asked who he was talking to, he turned his hollow gaze on her and replied, "The worms. They are listening." The next day, during group therapy, he told the psychiatrist he no longer believed he had organs. "There is nothing inside," he said flatly. "Only emptiness." The psychiatrist noted, insight fluctuating. At times acknowledges life, at times reverts to death delusion. Delusion remains systematized, resistant. It was progress, but fragile like glass. Meanwhile, the hospital staff were fraying. A senior nurse admitted she had begun dreaming about him, waking in the night with the image of his pale face staring upward, whispering of worms. "It's not just his delusion," she said in a debrief session. "It's the calm way he insists on it. I've had screaming psychotics, paranoid schizophrenics, manic patients. But this is like caring for the dead. And it stays with you." Other nurses confessed they lingered outside his room before entering, steadying themselves. Some prayed silently at the door. By the 7th ECT session, there was a shift. His weight stabilized. He began eating half his meals. He even spoke to his wife of memories, their wedding, the birth of their children. But in those same conversations, he undercut the hope. "I remember those things," he said gently, "but they belong to a man who died. I am not him." The family's emotions seesawed with his condition. His wife clung to every sign of progress. His son, skeptical, accused the doctors of prolonging a cruel charade. "You're keeping him half dead," the boy snapped. "Why not just let him go?" The psychiatrists explained again. Recovery was possible. Rare, difficult, but possible. Cases in the literature showed patients could return, sometimes suddenly, sometimes gradually. But no one could promise when or if. And still, the eerie details persisted. One afternoon, he asked a nurse to dim the lights. "It's disrespectful," he explained. "Corpses should not lie in the sun." On another occasion, he requested to be wheeled to the hospital chapel. Once inside, he sat in silence before the altar. When asked what he was thinking, he whispered, "I am waiting for the funeral mass to begin." The doctors pressed forward. Medication doses were adjusted. The ECT course extended. Each treatment was another roll of the dice, another chance that the conviction of death might fracture. By now, his case had become the subject of internal lectures. Medical students crowded into seminar rooms as psychiatrists presented his chart. Slides projected phrases like Cotard's delusion and nihilistic belief of death. The students listened wide-eyed as the attending explained. "Imagine the most basic conviction you hold, that you are alive. Now imagine that foundation collapsing. For him, death is not a metaphor. It is his lived reality. We cannot argue him out of it, because to him, we are the deluded ones." In the hospital cafeteria, whispers circulated. Some staff avoided the case discussions, saying it felt less like psychiatry and more like horror. Others admitted fascination, wondering aloud how fragile the mind must be to unravel in such a grotesque way. Then, unexpectedly, a turning point. One morning, after his 9th ECT session, he woke in recovery and asked the nurse, "Am I alive?" She froze, caught off guard. "Yes," she said carefully. He paused, then nodded. "I thought so. I felt my heart." It was the first time he had acknowledged life since admission. The note went into the chart, bolded by the psychiatrist. "Patient expresses doubt death delusion. Possible breakthrough." Hope spread like wildfire through the ward. Nurses smiled again. His wife cried with relief. But the euphoria was short-lived. That night, he called his wife close to the bed. She leaned in, expecting words of tenderness. Instead, he whispered, "Don't be deceived. I only said that to comfort you. My heart stopped long ago." The progress was slipping again. The following day, he refused meals, refused water, refused conversation. He lay motionless, whispering faintly, "I am rotting. Please stop feeding me." The staff recorded the relapse with clinical restraint, but among themselves, they admitted despair. By the 12th session, his body was failing again. Blood pressure unstable, weight critically low. The psychiatrist warned the family, if this continues, his belief will become self-fulfilling. He will die of starvation, convinced he has been dead all along. His wife broke down, sobbing into her hands. At this point, a new consultant was brought in, an older psychiatrist who had treated a single case of Cotard's decades before. He sat with the patient in silence for several minutes before speaking. "You believe you are dead," he said. The man nodded. "And yet you speak. Corpses do not speak. You walk. Corpses do not walk. You weep. Corpses do not weep. The patient stared at him. So tell me, the psychiatrist continued softly, what kind of corpse are you? The man blinked, as if the question itself cracked his certainty. That night, according to the chart, he accepted a full meal. For the first time, he told his wife, I might still be here. It was not recovery. Not yet. But it was a fracture in the delusion. The final weeks of his hospitalization unfolded in fits and starts, like a candle guttering in the wind. Some days he ate. Other days he refused. Sometimes he spoke of memories, sometimes only of worms. Progress was never steady. But gradually the balance began to shift. The ECT sessions continued. Each one seemed to carve a small crack in the delusion. By the 15th, he was walking the ward again. By the 16th, he joined a therapy group. His speech grew steadier. His eyes, once hollow, began to carry traces of presence. And then, one morning, the turning point arrived. A nurse entered his room to find him sitting upright in bed, staring at his hands. These are mine, he said quietly. The nurse nodded. They're warm. I can feel blood moving. He looked up at her, and for the first time in weeks asked, Am I alive? When she told him yes, he closed his eyes and whispered, Thank God. The recovery was fragile but real. He began eating daily. He asked for visitors. He asked about his children. His wife returned, cautious but hopeful, sitting at his side while he described dreams of walking in the sunlight again. The medical notes captured the change. Delusional intensity decreasing. Patient expresses uncertainty about death belief. Improved effect. Engages with family. Appetite returning. But even as the team celebrated, shadows lingered. At night, he sometimes whispered, I still wonder if I am tricking myself, if this is only a dream after death. It was during one of these twilight conversations that his wife asked him what had been the worst part. Not the hunger, he answered. Not the thirst. The worst was believing you were grieving me while I was still here. I could see you, hear you, feel your hand on mine. But I was certain it was a widow's hand. Certain I was gone. Eventually, after months of treatment, he was discharged. His weight had returned. His voice was stronger. His delusion, though not entirely extinguished, had weakened to a whisper he could challenge. On the day of his release, as the nurses wheeled him to the lobby, he passed the chapel where weeks before he had waited for his own funeral mass. He asked them to stop. For a moment he stared at the closed doors. Not today, he murmured. Today I walk out alive. The explanation. In the months that followed, his case was written up for medical journals. Psychiatry residents studied it. Neurologists debated it. And slowly, his story spread beyond the hospital walls. It had a name, Cotard syndrome, also known as the Walking Corpse Delusion, a condition so rare that fewer than a few hundred cases have ever been documented in medical history. It often appears in the setting of severe depression, psychotic disorders, or neurological disease. In some cases, brain scans show abnormalities in the parietal and frontal lobes, areas linked to self-perception. In others, no physical damage is found at all. The hallmark symptom, the fixed, unshakable belief that one is dead, does not exist or has lost vital organs. Some patients believe they have no blood, no stomach, or that their bodies are rotting from within. Others insist they are ghosts, trapped between worlds. And though the syndrome is psychiatric, its consequences are physical. Patients often refuse food, refuse water, refuse medical care, leading to dehydration, starvation, even death. Treatment is difficult. Antidepressants, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, and especially electroconvulsive therapy have been used with varying success. But there is no guaranteed cure. Recovery, when it happens, is fragile and slow. The reflection. Looking back, the staff described the case not only as a medical challenge, but as an encounter with the uncanny. One nurse admitted, I know it was an illness. I know it was the brain misfiring. But when you sit at a bedside and a man insists he is a corpse, when he refuses food, refuses water, and looks you in the eye with absolute certainty, You feel something you can't explain. Like the air changes. Like you are standing at the edge of life and death. His psychiatrist put it more clinically. Cotard's is not about the fear of death. It's about the conviction of death. That is what makes it so horrifying. For these patients, death is not in the future. It is in the present. They inhabit it. The epilogue. Months later, at home, he resumed fragments of his life. He ate with his family. He walked in the garden. But every so often, in quiet moments, he admitted the echo remained. "I know I am alive," he told his wife. "I can feel my heart, my breath. But sometimes, in the stillness, the thought comes back. Maybe this is only the afterlife, dressed to look like the world I left." His wife squeezed his hand. "Then let it be the best afterlife we can make." Closing narration. Cotard syndrome reminds us of something unsettling. That our most basic truth, the certainty that we are alive, depends on the fragile circuits of the brain. And when those circuits fail, even the undeniable signs of life can feel like illusion. To witness a man convinced of his own death is to glimpse the abyss between biology and belief. Because in the end, the horror was never worms or curses or possession. The horror was simply this, that the mind can bury the body long before the grave.